Hello and welcome. I am so glad you're here. When divorce knocks on your door, the financial aspects can leave you bewildered. You're not sure what the smart money moves are or how to make wise decisions. Well, listen in, because today Andrew Hatherley is going to share how he, after his divorce, transitioned his financial planning practice at age 59 to become a certified divorce financial analyst so he can help people like you and me make wise money moves. This is the Silver Divorce Podcast, broadcast from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And before we start, I would ask you to please follow this show if you haven't, and if you like what you hear, please share it with your friends and leave us a rating and a review. We are proudly brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. The Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. And I'm your host, Lisa McCluskey. And now, let's podcast. Well, as I mentioned, I am so happy to be joined by Andrew Hatherley, who is a certified divorce financial analyst, and he is the founder of two firms, Wiser Divorce Solutions, which works with people before and during divorce, and Transcend Retirement, which helps people with financial planning after divorce. Welcome, Andrew.
Well, hello there, Lisa. So great to chat with you.
It is wonderful to chat with you as well, and I'm really looking forward to this because the financial aspect is so bewildering when you're in the middle of divorce, and it comes at a time, as you know, when you are overwhelmed with emotional trauma. So it's really hard to make good decisions when you are making them maybe from an emotional standpoint, and it is so helpful to have somebody who can step back and look at the whole plan in a very holistic way and give some wise recommendations. So I'm looking forward to that with you.
Terrific.
Yeah. So though, let's first talk about your divorce. You went through a late in life divorce, and it completely changed your focus for your financial planning practice. Would you share your story?
Sure, Lisa, I'd be happy to. Well, I went through divorce in 2014/2015, and it's never a good thing to say when you've got that 2-year period in there. Ultimately, it took about 9 months, and it wasn't a pleasant process, as many divorces are not a pleasant process. And I was frankly humbled by the experience in a number of ways, but particularly being a financial advisor. This is, I was kind of taken aback by what I did not know about divorce finances. And in my case, and in the case of many people going through divorce, it's the largest financial transaction that will occur in their lifetime. So it really, I keep hammering the point home, it really does pay to be educated about the process. So, and as you mentioned in your introduction, there's a concept in the divorce world known as divorce brain, and that's when we're not thinking so clearly, that our emotions are really stretched, and that's not conducive to making wise financial decisions. And particularly for somebody later in life. Now, I was 52 when I went through my divorce, and I think on my 53rd birthday, the day after the divorce was finalized. Yeah. But for people getting divorced later in life, it's just the stakes are so much higher because we have less time to recover financially. So I realized, with what I learned both through my divorce and getting educated about the process, that my financial advisory practice really would provide more value if I could focus on that group of people who were going through mid to late life divorce, I could share my experiences. And then shortly after, about a year after, I earned the designation Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. I got trained in divorce mediation and collaborative law. Really started educating myself about the whole process. And I found out, much to my surprise, that my divorce at 52 was part of a societal phenomenon that would become to be known as, I call it gray divorce, you call it silver divorce, whatever, it's the same thing. That mid to late life divorce where people getting divorced in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, this is the only demographic that's seeing rising divorce rates. And so I thought, this is really where I can add more value to my practice by focusing on people either going through the process or emerging from the process and needing financial advisory help. And that would also give my work more meaning and purpose because it's coming from my authentic experience, and I'm sharing this with other people. And so that's another component to growing and rebuilding after divorce. And we can get into that a little later if you like, is finding more meaning in what you're doing, in your work, in your life, to kind of help you grow and rebuild following the divorce. So that's kind of a capsule of my experience. I got the training, I went through the experience, and I thought, the best thing that I could do right now is just to help people who are going through what I went through. And I found out that there's a lot of people, and as you know, going through this gray-silver divorce phenomenon.
Yeah, there are, and it's wonderful that you're now mission-driven to help people. You have your practice is built on purpose, and I see that quite a bit now with this divorce phenomenon. With people who are going through it at an older age, once they're through it, they want to turn around and help others, and that's the reason I started this podcast as well. I learned so much about it, and like you said, if I knew then what I knew now, I might have done things differently. Most people don't realize that in the United States, about 90 to 95% of divorces are eventually settled. People think that, they have to gear up for a trial and it becomes very contentious. But if a divorcing couple can approach it with the mindset that, we might settle, and how can we work together, as you mentioned, a collaborative divorce, that can really change the trajectory of how things are divided. And, another thought that I had as you talked about this societal issue of gray divorce is that it's really changing the trajectory of generational wealth, being able to pass down that generational wealth, because suddenly you're splitting what you worked decades to save and build, and two people are trying to live independently on, that nest egg, and that possibly changes what they're able to pass down. And so it has such far-reaching tentacles to that gray divorce. So I'm so glad we found you to help people through that. There's so much to think about. But you mentioned that you were originally financial planning, and then you received certification for your certified divorce financial planning. So can you just share with us a little bit about the difference, and
Sure.
then how you work with attorneys on crafting settlements?
Sure. So about 2 years after my divorce, after I'd earned the designation Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, I started a complementary business to my financial planning business. And I'll start with that because Wiser Divorce Solutions, which is my divorce advisory consulting business, works with people before and during divorce as I'm helping people go through the process. Either I'm working with a couple, perhaps as a neutral, or I'm working with an attorney as part of the divorce team as an advocate for somebody in divorce, and I'll get back to that in just a second. And then my longer standing practice, Transcend Retirement, is a registered investment advisor, investment advisory, financial planning firm that works with people. They don't necessarily have to be emerging from divorce, but certainly that's my outgoing focus is towards that demographic. But I work with people on retirement planning, retirement income planning, for when they retire and have to make their money last for the rest of their lives. And so I found focusing on the mid to late life divorce demographic, where people are emerging from divorce and they have perhaps half of their husband or wife's 401k, and maybe they weren't the person involved in managing that or dealing with investment decisions. They may be looking for a new advisor. So I help people on that after divorce aspect through my investment advisory firm, Transcend Retirement. So you mentioned working with attorneys. It can happen in a number of different ways. As I mentioned, the alternative dispute resolution processes, and there's mediation, collaborative law, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Amicable Divorce Network, which is relatively new, and I've just contributed 3 chapters to a book for them, so maybe we could chat a little bit about that later on. But that is another settlement-minded dispute resolution or divorce resolution process, and it's really gratifying to see the rise of alternative resolution processes to divorce, that many of which involve settlement-minded attorneys. Now, we see in the media, on TV, we remember the TV show L.A. Law back in the day, and there's Arnie Becker, the divorce attorney. Not a lot of attorneys have become disillusioned with what we sometimes call the divorce industrial complex, the litigious court battles. And as you mentioned a moment ago, even these processes that start out litigious and contentious, eventually they end up settling, 9.5 times out of 10, because people are just exhausted by the process. And as trial approaches, well, the costs escalate dramatically. Mm-hmm. So in my work with attorneys, we're trying to avoid that draining of money, and also the draining of emotions. In processes like mediation, collaborative, and amicable divorce process, it's all about focusing on settling, focusing on keeping it out of court, because as you mentioned, ultimately people tend to settle anyway. Right. So if I'm working as a neutral mediator, there might be there'll be 2 parties, and each will have their own attorney, but I'll be kind of directing a mediation process, and meanwhile the clients will be getting advice from their attorneys, and this is typically done over the course of a day in an office somewhere. Now, I also work as a neutral, where I'll discuss financials and then refer the parties to either consulting attorneys or an attorney to draw up the paperwork and do it properly legally. And of course, the other process is where someone may come to me. They might either hear me on the Great Divorce podcast or be referred to me by somebody, and I'll listen to them, and I'll think, well, I know an attorney who'd be good to help you in this case, and so I'll end up being the financial specialist on the case, and the attorney will help them through the legal aspects and work with the counterparty attorney, but I'll be a member of the divorce team, mm-hmm. working with the attorney and other experts, because it's important that while an attorney is not an expert on finances, and me as a financial expert, I'm not a lawyer, there are other professionals, therapists, coaches, certified divorce lending professionals, who all bring their own specialties and typically are less expensive than both the attorney and myself, that can add tremendous value to the process. So it's important in my work to get involved I like to get involved as soon as possible to help a person get in the right mindset to avoid that divorce brain, avoid those strained emotions which ultimately don't lend themselves to good financial decision making. And the process, whether it be mediation or amicable divorce, collaborative, this could encourage or establish good behavior at the outset, which ultimately will lead to better financial resolutions, I think.
Yeah, if you're approaching it from a standpoint of we want to craft an agreement that's fair to both parties, then looking for a settlement-minded attorney is the best way to go. But is it possible for somebody to come in and see you first to get an idea of here's my portfolio, here are assets, what recommendations can you make in terms of, what's a smart move to make from a tax standpoint perhaps, or, what are some smart moves for an exchange process? Is that the type of advice that you give to people?
Well, I split it into two categories. When I'm working with people going through divorce, typically the investment-related issues, that comes later, and I may or may not work with the person after divorce, but I keep it separate. But there are plenty of, and when someone comes to me after divorce, then we discuss about rebuilding and investing and distribution options, that sort of thing. But when we're going through the divorce process, yes, taxes are a very important issue, and the idea of splitting the assets so that the attorneys don't get rich and Uncle Sam doesn't get rich,
right.
And that particularly in later life when we've got less time to recover. So if we've got settlement-minded attorneys, has to be on both sides as well, because a settlement-minded attorney can run into a lot of trouble when the counterparty is a litigious type of attorney. So that's why processes like collaborative and the Amicable Divorce Network, there are people in those groups that are settlement-minded. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, with respect to the financials, well, we want to craft a settlement that, obviously taxes the result legally paid, but we don't want to give Uncle Sam a tip and give up more of our assets than necessary. So we really have to look at retirement plans, look at the house, which tend to be the two largest areas in divorce, and craft a division of property that is tax considered, because not all assets are the same in divorce. A regular IRA or a 401k that's worth $100,000, well, down the road, when those funds are pulled out of the IRA or the 401k, they're going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So they're not going to be as valuable as, say, a Roth IRA, which is tax free, or a bank account, which is a taxable account, but pulling money from a bank account's not going to cost you 25-30% in taxes. So it's important to keep those considerations in mind when you're doing the property division.
Yeah, so one of the things that comes up a lot is the house. What are some of the considerations people should have top of mind if they're considering keeping the house or selling and splitting the house?
Well, the house and retirement plans are typically the largest two assets in divorce, and with older divorcees, typically, not always, but typically they've got more equity in the house, and they may have held the house for a longer period of time and may see more gains in it. Now, traditionally, the female, the wife, has typically one of the stereotypes of divorce is that the wife will want to keep the house. It's often because of the children, but in gray divorce, silver divorce, the children are often adults by now. But many times there's an emotional attachment to the house, and the woman will often want to stay. But one thing I always make sure of when we're going through the divorce process is, well, can you afford the upkeep? It's all fine and good to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity in a property, but really, you can't go to a grocery store and say, pay for your eggs and bacon with equity in a house. You need cash flow. So when I'm working with people going through divorce, we always look at budgetary issues. And if you want to keep the house, that's fine, but can you afford the upkeep, and will you have plenty of cash left over to meet other life expenditures, groceries, travel, entertainment, all those sort of things. So that's one of the key issues with respect to the house. The other thing is that in some cases, the house is appreciated an awful lot, and there may be a lot of capital gains. You may have bought the house for $200,000, but it may be worth $1 million now. And know that the IRS allows divorcing couples to claim a $500,000 capital gains exclusion on the sale of the primary residence, but specific rules apply to that. And to qualify for that full $500,000 exclusion, you need to pass both an ownership test and a use test. And the ownership test is that either spouse must have owned the home for at least 2 of the last 5 years before the sale. And the use test is that both spouses must have lived in the home as their primary residence for 2 of the last 5 years. So if you're in a situation where you've got a lot of capital gains in the house, know that if one party's keeping the house and maybe sells it 10 years later, well, they may only be able to claim an individual capital gains exclusion of $250,000. So if there's a lot of gains in the house, it's always a good idea to speak to a CDFA such as myself and an accountant. Some accountants may not even be aware of the rules as pertaining to the sale of an appreciated house, just to understand how that might apply. How those gains might apply with the house in your particular situation. I should mention also that with respect to gray divorce, silver divorce, and the house, there have been a lot of changes and improvements to the rules surrounding reverse mortgages, which are now known as home equity conversion mortgages. And I've never been a huge fan of these, and they've been treated with some degree of skepticism in the industry, and they're not always sold well. But I've seen situations where these can provide home equity solutions in divorce mortgage planning. And it's always a good idea to bring in a certified divorce lending professional who are experienced in mortgage lending in divorce. The additional cost is minor compared to the expertise that a good certified divorce lending professional can bring in with respect to home issues in divorce. And I should mention also that divorce decrees are written in a language that sometimes isn't the sort of language that a lending officer needs to see in providing financing or refinancing. And that language can often be amended by the attorney with no appreciable changes to the actual terms of the divorce, but the language can be phrased in such a way as to make it much more possible for somebody to get financing or refinancing when emerging from divorce. So home issues are a big issue, and they're complicated, and they can be. And it really pays to avail yourself of the knowledge of the professionals who know about this, because most attorneys don't. Attorneys are specialized in the law; they're not specialized in mortgage lending or taxes or these type of home-related financial issues.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up about capital gains, because $500,000 exclusion really isn't very much, especially if you're in a high-cost state like California. And I can say in my divorce, the opposing attorney was asking me to pay a 20% upcharge on my IRA that I was going to give part of up, because that person would have to pay taxes when they withdraw it. Well, my response was, but if I'm keeping the house and paying out equity in the house, I'm going to have to pay capital gains if I sell that house. So really think about those aspects of, the tax portion. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And when it comes to the divorce decree, there's always a lot of confusion around, what is a quitclaim deed? What does it mean? Does that mean that the mortgage is automatically in my name? Can you clarify that a little bit for people?
No, a mortgage is a separate animal entirely.
Yeah.
If a couple bought the house through financing through a major bank and they're both on the mortgage, well, sometimes it's possible to remove one party's name from the mortgage, and this is why, once again, I consult with a qualified certified divorce lending professional to see if that's possible. But in many cases, that the house will need to be sold or refinanced to get one person off the mortgage. But transferring ownership doesn't remove one person from the mortgage, so you need to be careful in that regard. And certainly, I've seen cases. My own personal case in divorce is that I kept the house, which was actually below underwater because we're going back to the crisis of 2008, right. 2009, and the protections need to be put into the divorce decree to protect the spouse who's on the mortgage, saying if payments are, and you need to speak to, obviously, an attorney for the best language here, but you need to make sure that that mortgage payments are made so that person's credit is protected, and that there are remedies in place if the person doesn't pay the mortgage. That house needs to be sold and the mortgage paid off, or some other remedies can be put in place. But the ownership and mortgage are two entirely different things.
Yeah, be very clear. Make sure it's very clear, as you said, in your divorce decree, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So I wanted to ask you one thing. There are a lot of people that listen who've reached out to me who are just thinking about divorce. They're not happy. Maybe they're in that silent divorce category where they don't have a relationship with their spouse. But from a timing perspective, are there considerations about when is the best time to file, or some of the things that I should be doing from a financial aspect if I'm thinking of filing?
Well, there's a few different considerations there. First of all, the consideration with respect to the marriage itself. And, of course, there is couples counseling, which if there's difficulties between a married couple, they might choose to go to counseling. An extension of that, and this was a very popular episode of my podcast, was on discernment counseling. Mm-hmm. This is where one party may want a divorce and the other doesn't, and they go to a specialized type of counselor to talk through the issues, and maybe they decide not to get divorced. I mean, this is one of the myths of people such as myself involved in the divorce industry, is that we're pro-divorce. No, we're not pro-divorce. We're pro, I suppose, happiness and purpose and meaning and contentment. And we like to see a world where people are living a life of purpose, where they're happy and not bitter, resentful, and they're making the most of their lives. And sometimes that involves a change. That involves a transition from married life to single life, and perhaps remarriage after that. Mm-hmm. So, I would encourage various types of counseling, either typical marriage counseling, discernment counseling. But then with respect to timing, you don't want to rush into this. Now, obviously, if there are issues of safety issues or legal issues, that's when, you need to speak to an attorney, and the law will, an attorney might be necessarily involved early. But in a typical divorce where it's more about financial issues, I would take the time to get educated about the laws in your state, get educated about the alternative divorce processes, which is mediation, amicable divorce, collaborative divorce, and learn as much as you can before embarking on that or bringing the issue up with your spouse.
Got an injury that just can't wait? There's no need to delay your care. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is excited to announce that our Urgent Ortho Walk-In Clinic is now available on Saturdays at the Gun Barrel Road location. Open from 8 to noon, we're here to treat sprains, strains, fractures, and more. No appointment needed. So skip the long ER wait and get specialized orthopedic care fast. Visit us this Saturday at Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics Urgent Ortho. We're the center for expert care right when you need it. Learn more at sportmed.com.
Insofar as the financial issues with respect to timing go, well, I often see timing, it's a bit of a red flag when somebody comes to me and says, we're getting divorced, but my husband wants to get it done really quickly. I'm thinking, well, why does he want to get it done really quickly? I mean, I can understand not wanting to draw the process out for months and months and months and years in some cases and pay tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if I sense that one party's being pressured or rushed, that always raises a flag to me. Is the other party coming into some money in 6 months' time that they don't want to share as part of the divorce settlement? Is there a bonus or a commission check out there? So that's kind of when timing raises a red flag. But timing is also important with respect to, we talked about taxes. Obviously, taxes on married filing jointly the tax rates are less than filing as a single person. So if you're thinking about divorce or going through a divorce process and we're in November or December, well, if there's any way that we can safely put the process off till January or February, then the parties can file married filing jointly for that year. Remember that the IRS looks at your tax status or at your marital status on the last day of the year. So even if you're divorced on December 22nd, you've been married all that year, but it doesn't matter. You're going to be considered divorced for that year. So if the divorce can be put off to the new year with no obviously safety, security, or legal issues, that's something to consider. And the timing issue, I've come across an interesting anecdote on the timing issue insofar as Social Security is concerned, because I read somewhere that the average length, I'm not sure about the statistic, but I know in some cases, well, let's just say this. I did a workshop once where a lady was married for about 9.5 years, and she was getting divorced. And her husband was a pretty high earner and much higher than her. And I said to her, is there any chance this divorce, or is there any chance you might get divorced after you hit the 10-year anniversary? Because, and I think you know where I'm going here.
I know where you're going.
In order for one spouse to qualify to be able to collect spousal security divorce benefits, the parties need to be married for 10 consecutive years or longer. So for her to collect 50% of his earnings record for Social Security just required that she stay married for an extra 3 or 4 months. And so her eyes lit up when I told her that.
She can bite her nails for 3 or 4 months, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it also brings up the states that are equitable versus equal distribution. I know here in my state it is equitable, but the courts look at long-term marriage, which they also consider to be 10 years or more. And in those cases, they are more likely to make it equal distribution in a long-term marriage. So that's another reason to think about your timing, is how does your state really look at its consideration of a long-term marriage?
Oh, exactly. And it's a good point that you raised, Lisa, because the states have so many different approaches. You mentioned, equitable versus community property, which tends to be, split it right down the middle. Mm-hmm. But some states have more, quote unquote, favorable laws with respect to spousal support, and other states would be less spousal support friendly. So that's why it's always a good idea to not only speak with a certified divorce financial analyst, but consult with a couple different attorneys, do some consulting meetings. You don't necessarily have to hire the attorney off the bat. Hopefully you speak to someone such as myself first, and we can refer you to settlement-minded attorneys if your situation is one that lends itself to a settlement-minded process. And our listeners out there can find an attorney with whom they're comfortable and who can let them know about how divorce laws work in their particular state, and set their expectations a little bit. I know there are some people out there who think, well, we've been married for 20 years. I should be getting spousal support for the rest of my life. Maybe in state A you might, but in state B, they don't look kindly upon that sort of duration for spousal support at all. So right. It's that's where the legal advice is so important.
It is very important, and people will extend out and fight for things that if they knew what the state law was, they're not going to win anyway, because the state is pretty clear on what type of distribution it will allow in any divorce case. So
exactly.
As you said, do your homework, because you can save yourself a lot of attorney's fees if you are more settlement-minded, because that's, in good chances, that's where it's going to end up anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Social Security and the 10-year rule for marriage to be considered long-term. There does seem to be a lot of confusion about how Social Security works in later life divorces. Are there other things people should be keeping in mind regarding how do I collect on my spouses? How does that work? We see that question pop up quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, what's important to know is that if you're 62 or older and you were married to your ex for 10 consecutive years or longer, you might be able to collect up to half of your former spouse's Social Security benefit based on their earning history. But you're only going to get that divorced spouse benefit if it exceeds your own benefit based on your own earnings record. Now, a myth about this is that your spouse's Social Security benefit will be affected. Not at all. Not at all. You're not taking from your spouse. Your benefit is just being calculated potentially on the basis of their earnings record. So there are cases out there where a man has been married to 3 different women for 10-year or longer periods, and each of them are collecting a Social Security benefit based on his benefit, but his benefit's not affected at all. He still gets what he gets. So that's kind of one myth. But there are other eligibility criteria, and to qualify, your ex needs to qualify for retirement benefits or Social Security disability. Both you and your ex must be at least age 62 before you can claim as an ex-spouse. You can't be remarried. So I know a lady I used to work with says, if you're going to remarry, remarry up, remarry, because you may potentially relinquish your rights to your exes if you remarry. And you and your ex have to be divorced for 2 years or longer, or your ex must already be claiming retirement benefits. So it can get a little complicated, but there's a lot of information out there. I wrote an article for Kiplinger's on Social Security divorce benefits, and one of my podcast episodes discusses Social Security as well. But really, you should make an appointment and go down and speak to somebody at your local office of the Social Security Administration. And do it early. Do it before, during the process, to get a feel for what you might be able to collect. And once again, if your particular benefit is let's say $2,000 and your spouse's Social Security benefit is $3,000, well, you're just you're better off just claiming on yours because $2,000 is more than half of $3,000. So the Social Security Administration be able to get into the details a little bit more, but it's something you definitely want to be aware of when going through a divorce if you've been married for 10 years or more.
Yeah, I think then the most important thing is that it does not reduce your spouse's benefit at all.
Right.
I see that many times where a woman will say, well, I don't want to do that because it'll take away from him. No, that's not how it works. So it's your own benefit. As you mentioned, schedule an appointment, go and see what your rights are and what you're entitled to. So that's good advice.
Exactly.
Like yeah. So in all of the work that you do with couples, what do you see as the top 3 things to take care of from a financial standpoint?
You talk about during the process or after the process?
I would say after the process.
Right. So one thing that's very important is that once the ink on the divorce decree is finalized, if there's a 401k involved or IRA, whatever, execute the terms of the divorce decree. I came across a case where a lady was entitled to half of her husband's 401k, and for whatever reason, she didn't execute the quadro and get the money transferred to first of all an alternate payee 401k in her name, and then secondly roll it into an IRA. So I can understand people feeling relieved. Thank goodness it's all over. But now you have to get on with the work of executing the terms of the divorce decree. Transfer the accounts, whether it be a regular bank account or brokerage account, an IRA. Update your beneficiary designations on your investment accounts, your retirement accounts. You really need. This is where it's very important to speak to a divorce financial analyst such as myself after the process, and this is where I put my financial advisor hat, specializing in divorce, on, because I've got a checklist of items. I'm happy to share with any of your listeners of things that need to be done, and certainly as soon as the ink on the divorce is dry, speak to your attorney and speak to your financial advisor about what to do next. But certainly getting those accounts transferred, making sure, if you haven't already, that your spouse's name is off your credit cards. Update those beneficiary designations. That's something that a lot of people forget. There's a famous case with the Kennedy versus Kennedy, the DuPont savings plan. This is a couple that was married for a long, long time, and in the divorce decree, she waived her interest in his 401k. But he never changed the beneficiary designation at the plan with the plan sponsor. And in the retirement world, the plan document, the plan sponsor documents are the Bible of divorce. And what ultimately ended up happening was that she got his 401k assets after he died many years later, because he never bothered to change the beneficiary designation at the plan, despite the fact that she waived her rights to it in the divorce decree. So that just points up the importance of updating those beneficiary designations. So, obviously you mentioned quick claims. If there's a quick claim involved, execute that. Those are probably, and typically the most important issues deal with house and retirement plans. I should mention also that from a financial planning perspective, when a 401k is split in divorce, and let's say the couple are in their mid-50s, and let's say the wife is getting $500,000, half of, let's say the husband's 401k was $1 million and she's getting half. And so an alternate payee 401k account will be set up for her at her husband's 401k plan, so she'll have $500,000 in that. If she needs some money for expenses, maybe a down payment on a condo or buy a car, whatever, and other assets like bank checking, investment assets aren't available, if those are the only assets available, know that you can access those 401k assets pursuant to a quadro and not pay a 10% early withdrawal penalty. You're still going to have to pay ordinary income taxes on any money you withdraw from that 401k. But if you access those funds before rolling it into an IRA, you can avoid the 10% penalty. A mistake I see some people making in divorce is rolling their 401k that they receive from their spouse into an IRA right away and then saying, oh, I need $80,000 for this or $50,000 for that. Well, if you're under 59 and a half years of age, you're going to have to pay. There are some ways, but it gets complicated, but really you're going to be subject to a 10% penalty if you take the money after you've rolled it into an IRA. So that's always a consideration from a financial planning perspective, after divorce as well.
I'm glad you stepped back to talk about that because there is a lot of confusion as to what is a quadro and who drafts the quadro and how does a quadro get executed. I just had somebody email me that last night. Can you just give us a little bit of a primer on what a quadro is?
Yeah, a quadro is it stands for Qualified Domestic Relations Order, and essentially it's the instructions to a plan sponsor, such as the company that holds your 401k assets, on how that's going to be divided, and a judge needs to sign off on it. Typically drawn up by attorneys, but not always. There are quadro preparers that aren't attorneys, but you want to definitely get an experienced quadro preparer. And I actually had an interview on the Great Divorce podcast with a quadro preparer in Las Vegas, and I'd refer people to that particular conversation if they want to get into the nitty-gritty on quadros. But typically, they're required for. I mentioned defined contribution plans like 401ks. They also are used to divide pensions. It can get more complicated with military pensions because it's a different type of order. But they'll also establish, how a pension will be divided. So they're important documents in divorce and typically not used for IRAs. They're used for what are called ERISA plans, which is a particular type of federally guided retirement plan. But typically, you don't use quadros with IRAs or regular brokerage accounts. They're usually most commonly used with 401ks, pensions, and 403bs, retirement plans of that kind.
Great. And I always recommend that people call their plan and ask about the quadro and how it is, how they want it, because I can share that in my plan, which was a Fidelity plan, they had a template and they wanted you to use their template. And then I had another plan, which was very much a looser process. So I always recommend call your plan administrator and find out first if they have a document they want you to use. And if they have a quadro administrator, some of them have their own quadro administrators who will guide you as well. So get help. Yes.
Exactly. And all plans can be a little bit different.
Right.
A Fidelity, which is a huge, 401k plan administrator, they'll be well versed in working with quadros. But, some 401ks may be set up at a workplace, at a small workplace, and the owner of the workplace may be the administrator and have no experience dealing with quadros. So you really do need to get good advice there from somebody's experience in drawing up quadros.
Yeah, it does guide everything, and if you do it right, it can be executed pretty quickly after the divorce. But some plan administrators can be very finicky, and if it's not drafted exactly correctly, unfortunately, it'll be sent back, and it can take months if it's,
yes.
So do get help. It's a complicated process sometimes, and you need that expertise.
It sure is.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to think about when you're going through the whole divorce process and all of the financials. But have you seen what are some of the most commonly overlooked implications of financial considerations? Like, what do people typically just forget about?
Well, it's funny. There's such a thing as a safety deposit box. I don't know how many people use safety deposit boxes anymore, but this is something that's overlooked sometimes, is when there's assets in a safety deposit box. And
that's a good one. Yeah.
Frequent flyer points.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Yes. I read of a case where the one spouse had over 1 million frequent flyer miles, and it wasn't even considered that there's a value to those.
Oh, for sure. Maybe even side businesses, of course, personal possessions, if collectibles, perhaps, jewelry, crypto's. I think people are aware that when people hold crypto accounts, but that can be, kind of funky, dividing in divorce. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the overlooked assets. Upcoming, I would always try and be aware of, if there's any upcoming bonuses one of the parties is receiving. Those are sometimes overlooked.
I liked your comment about collectibles. People don't think about it. For example, I know somebody, remember the old Hot Wheels that were...
I used to have Hot Wheels.
Right. Well, Hot Wheels collection, I know one person who discovered that some of those little cars, the vintage ones, are selling for $2,000-$3,000 each. And there was a very large collection that it wasn't even a consideration that that's an asset that needs to be considered. So, look around your house and see what's being collected. There can be a lot of money in those collections.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It takes me back to when I was younger. I had a pretty nice hockey card collection. I grew up in Canada, so I collected hockey cards, not baseball cards. But I think I gave those to a youngster, even before I hit my mid-teens, and I stopped. I became more interested in girls than hockey cards, and gave up my hockey card collection.
Well, now it's probably worth quite a bit if you'd kept it. So,
I know.
Yeah. Well, you would have lost probably half of it in the divorce anyway. So
that's right. She would have one of my hockey card collections.
That's right. Yeah. So I have to ask, in your years of working with people, is there a particular person or couple, and you don't have to name them, but just an instance that really particularly moved you?
I always get, there's been a couple of cases where I've done neutral mediations with, there have been attorneys on either side, but the parties have approached the divorce with a very kind, generous, open attitude. And there's been, it's not like they didn't have money. They had investments or assets that needed to be divided up. But it always gives me a warm glow when I can help facilitate a process when people start out with good intentions, because divorce can, there's the old saying that the criminal justice system may see bad people on their best behavior, but the divorce process sees good people on their worst behavior.
Absolutely.
And anything that if I can play a role in emphasizing that, facilitating that, that always moves me when I see people wanting to get it done amicably, fairly, and move on with their lives going forward to be productive human beings. That's you see that reasonably often. Divorce is not always the friendliest, and it's sometimes, even when it's contentious, if I can help lower the disagreements and educate people along with the other professionals to get it done in a kinder manner. That's always very, very gratifying. I would happen to say, on the other hand, I've been involved in a couple of divorce cases with people with a lot of money, and I'm talking millions and millions of dollars. And if it's ever a cliche was true, is that money doesn't buy happiness. And it's divorce is a legal process, but it's about money. But if I've seen people with a fair amount of money get divorced very happily, and I've seen people with a ton of money, even emerging from the divorce with more money than we could ever imagine, not being happy. And I think ultimately it comes down to what the scientists and the researchers repeatedly show in their studies. For instance, the Harvard study of adult human development is that the most important thing is relationships. And relationships with your family, your friends, and having a journey that means something to you. Maybe not the end goal, but a journey that you're walking on that gives you purpose and fulfillment. And I see my job as helping people finance that fulfillment after divorce. Because, just give you an example of my own particular situation. I had always planned on retiring at age 60 to, a life of golf and tennis and the beach. Well, when I got divorced in my mid-50s, I realized I probably have to work a few more years. Well, instead of retiring at 60, I started the Great Divorce podcast at 60. But that was part of a process that where I reoriented my work, as we discussed earlier in the podcast, towards more of a mission and a purpose, and my work became more meaningful to me, and in adding more value to the people I'm working with. And I think that's ultimately the source of contentment, is doing something where you feel that you're making a positive impact on the lives of other people. So I'm always moved by people who are moving along that path. And with respect to the finances, I obviously want to help people rebuild after divorce. But if you're finding more joy in what you're doing in your work, then chances are you don't necessarily want to retire to golf or tennis, which frankly, I've seen evidence that it can get boring for people once it moves from being a novelty to something that's there every day. And ultimately, it's having a life of meaning that and relationships that derive from that is a source of true wealth. It's not just dollars.
That's wonderful. I have to agree wholeheartedly with that. I was divorced at 66 and started this podcast at 67. I'm coming up on a year, and it's been immensely satisfying to help people as they're going through the same journey I did. So
no, that's incredible. That's incredible, Lisa, and that's the sort of story that inspires me. Is your story of starting a podcast at 67? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of, this is the thing about social media and podcasting and YouTube. I'm seeing a lot of people over 60 making the most of their third act by sharing their wisdom and sharing the things that they do well, sharing their strengths with other people and inspiring other people. Some of my favorite podcasts are cycling podcasts with a guy in his 60s who records cycling trips around the Southeast. Music podcasts with musicians in their 60s getting into details of great music. These are things that inspire me, and I think I've heard someone say once, and I've taken it to heart, that the greatest gift you can give someone is to inspire them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just started the Empowered Career Woman podcast last week. And I am interviewing women who are entrepreneurs or who have made it to the top of their industry. And the whole concept is to inspire those who are coming up the ladder by hearing the stories of those who made it. So it's wonderful that this particular option is out there for people. Podcasting is growing in listenership among this gray generation, although I hate to think of myself that way. I still see myself as a 30-year-old, so but it's a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed having you on today. Thank you, Andrew. Would you share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you, what your website, your podcast, I think you've mentioned, and then your social media?
Sure. If someone's in the before or during stage of divorce, you might want to visit my website, wiserdivorcesolutions.com. If you're a late life divorcee emerging from divorce and you need help with investment planning, financial planning, retirement income planning, you can visit my website at transcendretirement.net. That's .net. Also on the transcendretirement.net website, you'll find the podcast page for the Gray Divorce podcast. If you'd like to email me, the easiest email, because my name is misspelled so often, is Andrew at wiserdivorcesolutions.com. And on social media, probably the best place is LinkedIn, just under my name, Andrew Hatherley. I should mention that I'm not sure the date that this discussion is going to be published, Lisa, but I did contribute to a book called Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution. I contributed 3 chapters to that book, and it's going to be released on March 25th of this year on Amazon. So if people want to, that's really, it's about 500 pages, that book, so it's like jam-packed with divorce-related information through the Amicable Divorce Network. And people can find out more about that on divorceamicably.com. And I'm in the process of releasing a very readable 12-page paper on gray divorce, and I'm happy to share that. I'm happy to send a PDF to any of your listeners who might be interested. Just email me and ask for that at andrew@wiserdivorcesolutions.com.
Wonderful. I will put all of that in the show notes so people can easily find it. And I will post it on the Silver Divorce Podcast Facebook page and Instagram page as well. So thank you again, Andrew. It's been delightful to talk with you. Please join me on the next episode of the Silver Divorce Podcast. I also ask that you hit that follow button and share this podcast with people who could benefit from hearing these experts. The podcast is brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. And Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. Whether you are considering divorce or you are newly in the divorce process, we'll help you on your journey and tell you things your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce is just one event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.